In this video, I want to share with you 3 real-life stories. These are all true stories that we came across last week, and they all help answer this really simple question, which is, should your design team, as a real estate investor or land developer, should your design team have a land surveyor on board? So if you're working with an architect or a civil engineer, should you also have a land surveyor on that team if you're doing a development project here in California? And all 3 of these examples I'm going to give you help you answer that question. And they're actually all they're sad stories. I see this thing a lot. People call here looking for help when they've got problems. And it's really frustrating for me sometimes that people don't get a surveyor involved sooner in the process. And it's frustrating that these design professionals, these architects and civil engineers and structural engineers don't take steps to get a land surveyor involved, get involved earlier in the project. And so in the examples I'm going to give you, we're actually going to look at a couple. One's 2 are civil engineers and another is a structural engineer. And we're going to see how their failure to get a land surveyor on board, how that affected their clients' projects. And this video won't be long. The stories will be short. So here's the first one. This was a development of a distillery wine tasting kind of type of facility in West Stockton. And a civil engineer was hired to help with that project. And the civil engineer didn't check to see if the development was in a flood zone. And of course, if you're anywhere west of Stockton, you are in a flood zone. Any land surveyor worth his salt that works in the Central Valley understands that we have huge flooding issues in the valley, especially out in the Delta. And that one of the very first things I would have checked for the client I would have checked the flood zone, and I would have realized we were in a flood zone. And that doesn't mean you can't build, but that means there's going to be repercussions for your design. And the civil engineer didn't do that. So what happened is the client's project got put on hold. The engineer ended up having to redesign the buildings, the proposed buildings. The client had to go back to the reviewing agency and ask for a 1-year extension on their building permits. So, the engineer, he cost his client a year, and, there was money that had to be paid to reapply and to get extensions. And, it's possible that the client had to pay for some of those redesign costs. So again, if that civil engineer had a land surveyor on board early in the process, 90% chance the surveyor would have caught those flood hazard issues early on in the project, and it could have saved the client a lot of time and a lot of money. Second example was a site plan that was prepared by a civil engineer, different civil engineer, prepared by a civil engineer in Stockton. This is for a piece of industrial property that was being developed. And the civil engineer didn't get a site plan. So he submitted, he didn't get a survey. He just prepared a site plan off the assessor's plat. Didn't get a survey. Goes in for city review, and the city says, hey, you've got proposed improvements here, street improvements and drainage improvements. We don't know if they're in the public right of way or if they're on the private parcel. You need to go get a survey. So by the time the engineer responded to the city and the client, the site plan approval had, the application had expired, so the client had to reapply, pay the fee again. And then the client called me trying to get help to figure out what he needs to do to get his site plan approved. And they need a boundary survey. We got to go out and figure out where some of the existing improvements are, and then figure out where these proposed improvements are going to be. Again, here's an example of a design team that prepared a site plan without the benefit of a survey, cost their client time, cost their client money. If he'd got a good topo boundary survey right at the start of that project, he would have avoided these problems for his client. Here's the last story. In this case, this is a structural engineer. This is in Modesto. Structural engineer prepares and signs a set of plans for a small residential development. So there's 2 existing buildings on this parcel. They're going to add another 7. The first phase adds the first 2 buildings. The site plan shows the buildings up against the setback, 5-foot setback against the property line, shows distances around the boundary. Site plan gets approved by the city. They go to do construction. The forms for the foundations get set. The building inspector says, hey, before you can pour concrete on your foundations, I need the engineer to certify that the forms are inside the setback. The structural engineer tells the client, I'm not a surveyor, can't help you, so sorry. Stops returning phone calls, essentially. Client calls me in tears. They've got a contractor in a concrete truck waiting to pour concrete. they can't get the city inspector to sign off. So we got to help this gal now. She needs a boundary survey. It's possible that the improvements aren't going to fit on the lot as designed. It's a small lot. Things are pretty compact. She may not meet setback. So again, this structural engineer really did his client a disservice. They should have got a good topographic and boundary survey at the very start of this process when they prepared their site plan, and they didn't. So all three of those stories are local. 2 from Stockton, 1 from Modesto. All of them happened in the last couple weeks. Really sad. Clients that got cost, that had to spend extra time and extra money because there wasn't a good land surveyor on the design team. And these design professionals are trying to practice outside their area of competence. They shouldn't be preparing site plans without a good boundary and topographic survey. When they do that, they cost their clients money. Get a good land surveyor on your design team for your project.